And welcome to the PCS Grades webinar. We are so excited to be here with you today talking about the topic of disaster preparedness and emergency preparedness with super expert Rebecca Allwine, Army spouse and PCS Grades guest writer. I'm Lizanne Lightfoot. I'm the senior content editor here at PCS Grades. I'm a Marine Corps spouse, mom of 5 kids, currently preparing for a PCS move, so pardon my boxes. And as far as disasters, I'm the survivor of a couple of hurricanes at various military bases. And this is my wonderful co-host, Tessa Robinson.
Hello, hello. I'm so excited to be back this week talking about truly one of my favorite topics. I irrationally love talking about disasters, preparedness, all things emergency management. And honestly, one of my favorite people in the world, Rebecca Allwine. We're so excited to have you. We were just talking a little bit behind the scenes how when Rebecca and I met, I think in person, maybe 6 years ago, we figured out we had this shared love of emergency planning. So it is really not just an honor to have you on, but a joy. We're excited. So first question, Rebecca, always a softball. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I am an Army spouse, mother of 3, and a true lover of emergency management and disaster planning. My background in emergency management and emergency services started, let's just say at birth. My parents met in an EMT class. My father, grandfather, uncle, friends of the families were all volunteer firemen. So never did a holiday go by where everybody was actually at the table because somebody's burning something somewhere down the road. In college, I became a volunteer EMT, and then I worked as a 911 dispatcher. Then I met my soldier and started traveling the world, where I have experienced pretty much every natural disaster that you can imagine. We packed out during a hurricane, gave birth during a wildland fire. Several tornadoes have torn through the various places that I've lived, and earthquakes. I've lived through one in California, but the rest of them were in really weird places like Maryland and Georgia. So I discovered my love for the emergency management side of things during my senior year of college when Hurricane Katrina obliterated the Gulf Coast. And I went to grad school where we called ourselves Masters of Disaster. And I wrote my thesis on who should respond to these emergencies. Should it be the National Guard? Should it be civilian response? And so I really dug into that disaster and learned a lot about it. And I've been able to use some of that over the last couple of years. Well, it's actually been more than a couple of years now since then, but we'll say the last couple of years. And my goal with all of the things that I've learned over these last 16 years of being a military spouse is to share them with other people. So knowledge is only as good if you share it with others. And that's what I'm hoping to do today, to ease some minds and give some practical advice.
Absolutely. We are so excited to have your expertise here. And I know we have people tuning in from all over the country. So go ahead and give us a shout out. Welcome, Rebecca, and tell us which duty station you're tuning in from, if there are particular disasters that you've experienced or that you are concerned about at your current duty station. Because remember, at the end of the webinar, Tessa is going to spin that wheel of names, and we're giving away a very cool prize today, which is an emergency preparedness kit that the PCS Grade staff has put together, sourcing a lot of the things that Rebecca is going to be talking about today. So share your questions, your comments, ask what you need to know, because we have an expert right here with us. So let's dive in and talk about people moving to duty stations with natural disasters. And Rebecca, we thought it would be great to organize this kind of by topic because you never know what you're going to hit. So first up, talk to us about floods, what to expect, how you should prepare, and what to keep in mind if you're in a flood zone.
So first of all, you should know if you are actually in a flood zone. You can find those maps online through the county or the city that you live in. It's important to know what flood zone you're in. If there is, they'll be labeled with various things. And you'll want to know that because that's how they're going to start evacuating people based on those zones that you live in. One thing I really want to mention about flood damage, it's so expensive. And flood insurance is not something that is automatically applied to your renter insurance or homeowner's insurance. So if you think that you're going to be in a flood zone or hurricanes with lots of water, you need to add that flood insurance, and it takes 30 days to go into effect. So you needed to do this yesterday. So put it on the to-do list for today, because we are in hurricane season. Flooding can happen at any point, and you want to be prepared for that. My kind of top flood piece of advice is to just be prepared that it's going to happen probably in the middle of the night, and you want to keep things up off the floor as much as possible. So if you have a fire safe box, that's going to withstand that water. If you have important mementos or something, put them up on a shelf. That little bit will help in the long run. Other than that, I mean, water it's damaging. It will damage a lot of things in your house. So prepare as much as you can, keep things up off the floor, and then just be ready to evacuate when they tell you to. You do not have time to wait.
For sure. That makes sense. And we do have Jenna tuning in here from Fort Stewart that gets both hurricanes and flooding, because a lot of times those two go together. So talk to us about the hurricanes. I have lived on the East Coast. I've had a North Carolina hurricane hit us. I've lived on the Gulf Coast and had some Gulf hurricanes come through. And if you did not grow up with them, they can definitely be terrifying. So what are the preparation tips and your best advice for those storms?
So definitely hurricanes are something that can be very scary if you did not grow up accustomed to them. One of the things I've noticed over the last couple of years is that with modern technology, we know that they're coming so much farther in advance, and it is both a positive and a negative. You see storms being named, you see storms a week out, and people are starting to panic at that point. The number one thing, this would apply to all of the disasters that could hit you that come with warning, is to find reliable information. Okay, so you probably have heard of Mike's weather page. He's an amateur out of Florida who has great information, but I would highly advise looking at local information and NOAA. What is that? National Oceanic
Mm-hmm. And
okay, so they will,
Atmospheric Association.
Exactly. And they're on Facebook, and they will go live several times a day giving you out-of-state information. Hurricane damage comes from rain, that water, and the winds. So just like with anything outside, you want to secure it as much as possible, put things in the garage if you have one. If it's going to be a direct hit or something close to that, then move things away from windows. Find a spot inside where you can protect yourself and your family from those high winds. A question I get a lot is, do I need hurricane shutters? Well, maybe. This is where I would talk to your neighbors, honestly, people who have lived there for a while. If they're bringing out the hurricane shutters, the plywood over the windows, then you should do that too. If they're not worried, you might want to be a little bit more worried than them, because they've probably lived through several of these. But talk to them, talk to people in your neighborhood or in your community, and ask them what they do to prepare. And most importantly, when they start to be concerned, because that's when you also want to start to be concerned. Hurricanes vary in their intensity. Some of them won't feel like anything. Others will be rough.
That makes sense. All right. Well, Tessa, I know you're a Midwest gal, so I'm going to let you take the next couple of disasters here.
So I grew up in Nebraska, Kansas, and South Dakota. So tornadoes, as a kid, seem a little scary until your dad's outside on the porch, like, "Oh, guys, come look at the funnel clouds." So Rebecca, that said, tell us what we need to do in the event of a tornado.
Well, not that part. I mean, you always see people that are chasing the storms. We don't need to be those people. There are already those people. Tornadoes are hard because you don't always have a lot of warning for them. So this is when it's important to really be tuned into your local news and weather stations. And if you live on the installation, you might have that giant voice that will talk to you. Several times in places in the Midwest, they have tornado sirens that will help alert you if you live close enough to them. But you just really need to be aware of when it's a possibility, a higher possibility than normal. Smartphones are great for this because they will alert you as the weather changes. They'll say, you're under a watch or a warning, or there's one been spotted. So the same thing applies. If you know there's a big storm coming, you're going to want to prepare for the possibility of a tornado by, again, securing all the things outside, making sure that you have a plan for where you're going to go if you're at home and if you're not at home. If you're driving down the road, do you know what to do if you see a tornado? If you don't,
do not.
Head out, right? So you're not going to want to keep driving towards a tornado. Get out, find some place that you can take shelter, maybe under an overpass or in a ditch somewhere. I mean, you don't want to be caught up with a whole bunch of other debris if it's coming at you, but just try to make that best choice there. Stay put, stay home. We had a tornado that ripped through Georgia. And my kids were on one side of it and I was on the other side of it. And it took every ounce of me not to leave to go get them, right? I'm rationalizing. It's a brick building. It's an old building. They have a basement. It'll be fine. Doesn't matter. If I were to drive there, I'd just be caught up in the tornado. So have a plan, calm yourself, and make sure that you stay safe. Some places will have those shelters underground. Tessa, I don't know if you grew up with any of those or your neighbor had those. But really, you want to be low to the ground because then you don't have as much stuff kind of flying around you with that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So Rebecca, I think the last I remember reading, average tornado warning time is 9 minutes. I think Joplin, Missouri, which is, of course, one of the worst in recent history, was, I think, 4 minutes. So if you have 4 minutes, which is impossible to think through, what is the most immediate thing that people need to do?
I find this one to be hard because I view it from this, like I have kids. So if I'm home with my kids, that's my priority, right? Get them, get somewhere low to the ground, safe, underground if possible, but certainly tucked away somewhere. If I'm not home, I still want to do that. I still want to get somewhere low to the ground, away from, trees, cars, that kind of stuff that might get picked up. But just take that time to find yourself a safe spot. If you're with other people, what they say in airplanes, secure your own mask before taking on the responsibility of something else. But just try to get somewhere where you're going to minimize your risk of being hit by something or swept away with something.
Yeah. Away from windows, interior room,
absolutely,
ground, all those things. Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely. I think too, I mean, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, and I hope we spend some time on this, the importance of having a plan, because that way people have an opportunity to plan for those things. If you only have 4 minutes, where do you go? What do you do in your house? All those things. So moving on from tornadoes, which I could talk about literally all day. Wizard of Oz is still my favorite movie. What about earthquakes?
Again, something hard to prepare for because you're not going to have really any warning, except if you live on a fault line, then you'll know that they're expected. One thing I really wanted to point out with earthquakes is that you might have heard it's important to stand in a doorway. Don't do that. Okay, that is not something you don't want to be there. You really want to get under some sturdy, a desk, a table, something sturdy, cover your head and your neck, and be close to the ground and an interior wall. So the misconception, or maybe an earlier thought, was to be in doorways. And I just want to make sure my notes here it specifically says don't get in the doorway. Don't do that because things are going to be flying around, moving. They're not structurally sound. You want to be close to load bearing wall, something that's going to protect you inside the house. Don't run outside. Stay inside. Make sure everything's done. Be careful with aftershocks, wait till there's that all clear. Now, if you're upstairs and an earthquake's coming, you don't need to run downstairs. Okay, get somewhere on an interior wall, low to the ground, cover your head and neck. You don't need to be running all over the place.
Yeah. Oh, I like Jenna's comment. Every movie ever shows people in the doorway, so I would still think that.
Right? That's why I wanted to make sure I wrote it down. Do not get in the doorway. Don't do it.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the different types of disasters, which, of course, whenever you move to a new duty station, it's so important to do that hazard vulnerability assessment and see what disasters actually face your area. Talk to us about emergency kits. Should we have one? What do you recommend keeping in the kit? Where should the kit live? All of those things.
This is a really great question. And I often joke that I'm the most unprepared emergency preparedness person out there. I don't have one. That might come out to be. Let me explain why I don't have one. It really depends. It depends on your family's needs. It depends on your location. It depends on a lot of things. So where I live right now, we might get the outskirts of a hurricane. We might get a random tornado. The chances of our family right now needing to evacuate quickly is very small. We also don't have any specific medical concerns or medications or kids that need extra support or extra equipment to travel. I could literally get in the car right now with 3 kids and a dog and go where I needed to be. That's why I don't have one. When we lived in Florida, we had some clothes packed and ready to go. I have a fire safe box that I can grab at a moment's notice. When we lived in Arizona and there were wildfires, the same thing. We had that kind of go bag ready. I advocate for it to be in the car because you might not be home when you need to leave that area. So think about what your family needs, what you need to kind of rough it, so to speak, for a couple of days. If you need to drive to family or friends or go to an evacuation center, like what do you need? Have that stuff on hand. I also buy a lot of canned vegetables we have around. Protein is always in my house, protein bars. So I tend to buy food that we could also use in an emergency situation. So you might want to have some protein bars around. If I had a kid still in diapers, I'd have those ready, formula ready, that kind of stuff. So just think about what you need and then decide if you need that full-fledged emergency kit or not.
Awesome.
That makes sense. I mean, we have a fair amount of camping supplies. So for the sheltering in place, we have the flashlights and all the emergency stuff there, but it's very different if you're trying to evacuate. And I know our last storm here knocked out our power for about 4 days. And I have a family of 7. So that's quite a lot of canned goods and shelf-stable food that you need. So we definitely learned from that experience to prepare a little bit differently for the next storm.
Absolutely.
I do want to bring up the question of kids because we've had a couple of comments coming in from Facebook. Daniela asked, how do you prepare younger kids? And then similarly, Courtney asked, how do you prepare kids that tend to be afraid you don't want to exaggerate the danger, right?
I think this is a fantastic question. I think it's important that we talk to our kids in an age-appropriate way about everything, but particularly these things. If you think about by the time they start school, they're going through fire drills. They're learning to listen in situations where they might have extra questions, but kids tend to know when to push that button and ask why and when just to listen. Practice these things with them. Go over how to call 911, their address, where to meet if they're not at home. Growing up, we actually did fire drills in our house. My mother would stand at the bottom of the stairs and say, "I'm a fire, you can't come this way." And we have to find a new way to leave. So, I mean, when your father is a fireman, you do things like that. But it actually really helps you know what to do. I mean, if you have 4 minutes, you need to already know what to do. You don't have time to think. So talk to them a little bit. Explain that there's a storm coming and, we're watching the news so that we have information on the storm. And if the storm comes in the middle of the night, I'm going to come get you and I'm going to bring you to this place. If you're at school and you have a tornado drill, this is what you should do. It's okay to practice with them. As your kids get older, they'll know that things are happening in the news before you do, and they'll know what's going on, but they practice it with them, have a plan. We had, I think it was tornadoes coming through, hurricanes, a couple years ago when my son was in daycare. And when I went to go pick him up, he said, "Mom, we need to listen to the weather radio so we know what's happening. And when we turn on the weather radio, we don't talk." And I was like, perfect. This is what you learned at school.
You remembered.
Right, exactly. There are also a variety of books out there, coloring sheets. When you think about Fire Prevention Month and the stuff that they do for that, it's all out there. I feel also like I wrote an article about it. I might have to find that and share that. It might have been for y'all about how to prepare kids for that, but really talking to them, going through it. You can even say, this concerns me too, but here's our plan.
And Courtney, we just dropped the link to want to make sure your family is prepared for an emergency. Read our tips on making a disaster plan in the comments. And there are some great resources in there about how to talk to kids specifically. There's a Red Cross app called, I think, Play with like Pedro's Fire Safety, and it gamifies a lot of the different situations. So there's some great resources on the PCS Grades blog that hopefully you'll find useful. The Red Cross has some great things for that as well.
For sure. Well, on that topic of planning, you went over how important it is to practice with the kids. But whether or not you have kids, when you move to a new duty station and you're trying to get your bearings and figure out, what are the concerns around here? What are the most likely natural disasters? Do you need to have an evacuation plan as part of your emergency response? Do you think it's common to evacuate, or is it more likely to shelter in place?
I think you need to have a plan for both, but absolutely you should have an evacuation plan for a variety of reasons, and not all of them are emergency natural disasters. You need to know where you can go and where you should go in case of an emergency. And I had this somewhere in my notes, but I wanted to make sure I say military spouses in particular need to be able to do this on their own. You know this. They might not always be there to help you do this. Okay, so make your plan. Make sure that it's something that you can do on your own. We lived in Florida when Irma was coming through, and the Army had a plan for my husband. They did not have a plan for us. Their plan was to put him on a bus and drive him to, I think, Fort Benning and put him in a gym. And I could just imagine him not getting on this bus while the four of us are standing there at the end, like make a plan. If you have pets, make a plan on where you can take them. That's where the medication comes in. I mean, look at the Red Cross website and their app. They're going to have some ideas on evacuation. A lot of schools will become evacuation centers. If you're close enough that you can drive to a friend's house or a family member and just get out of the way. That's a big thing as a first responder. I mean, if you can just get out of the way, then you free up those resources for people who can't. So have an evacuation plan. Have a couple plans, and just have a shelter in place plan also. Have some candles and some batteries and flashlights and canned goods. But know where you're going to go, because, again, then you don't have to think. You can just do.
Yeah. I like that, having multiple plans, because we're down here in the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, where there's hurricanes every year, apparently. And when we moved here, we have no family nearby. And our default was, well, we'll just drive inland. I mean, pick an arbitrary place a few hours away, and sure, that's where we would stay. And the last time we had a major hurricane come through, the path was directly north, inland, randomly. And so that really messed up our plan. And we ended up evacuating to Florida for a hurricane, which just seemed very counterintuitive. But at the time, that was the best way to get out of the zone. So,
yeah. I mean, I think, and you think about it, if your plan is to drive inland away from the hurricane, so is everybody else's plan. There's one way really to go, right away from it. So really think about that. And I would err on the side of leaving early if you can. I did that with Hurricane Irma. I mean, I left. It didn't hit us, but I left. I got out of the way. My kids and I were gone. We went to a friend's house. So we had a little vacation, but there wasn't that stress added to it. I did want to add, when we were there in Florida, we were at a naval installation, and they asked for our family's evacuation plan when my husband in process there. So some places might be asking for that. And if they're asking and you don't have an answer, that's your key, that you need one.
That's impressive. That's great that they do that. So I'm in Norfolk, Virginia now. And I guess it was maybe 2-3 years ago, we were in a mandatory evacuation zone. I will tell you, the zone ended across the street from us. And so it was kind of like, do I want to go across the street? I'm also a big believer, like you, Rebecca, in preparedness. And I think, having spent time in New Orleans after Katrina, you recognize that the number one killer in a disaster is complacence. And so I think for a lot of folks who have lived through it, 10, 15, 20 times, they evacuated and nothing happened, or they didn't evacuate and they were fine. We do tend to build this complacency. So talk to me about, you're in a mandatory evacuation zone. We talked a little bit about where do you go, maybe a friend or family members. What is that? Does insurance cover that? How does that work?
Oh boy. So that's going to be an it depends answer, right? And we can find some additional resources and circle back with some of them. But I have heard everything from yes to no, depending on where you are and what happened. Jenna might be able to speak to this. I'm not sure if she was in the area when they did evacuate the installations on the Georgia coast, and there was a lot of debate and strife over who was getting reimbursed by the military and who wasn't. So it depends. I mean, I want to say, yes, of course they'll help you out, but we know that that's not always how it goes. Right. Your property, if it's affected, will be covered by your insurance if you have flood insurance, etc. But as far as your travel and reimbursement, that's kind of an it depends. FEMA might step in if there's a state of an emergency. There's just a lot of factors there. And we'll find a good resource that kind of gives you kind of that flow chart of what's there and what's not. It's easy for me to say just go and figure the rest of it out later, but that's not helpful. And that's why a lot of people don't evacuate, because they aren't sure if they can afford the time off or the hotel, or that kind of stuff. So, well, I'll find some resources and we can share them.
That'd be great. Yeah, we definitely appreciate you putting them in afterwards. I know USAA is usually pretty good about reimbursing hotel and even spoiled food in your refrigerator. Again, of course, depending on circumstances and, what the local situation is. So you do have to kind of play that by ear. And at our particular base, they've told us that the base housing is approved up to Category 3 storms. So they won't do a mandatory evacuation unless it's expected to be above a level or Category 3 hurricane, which is very stressful and frustrating. But sometimes people are like, just give the order already, let us go. Right. But yeah, for 1 or 2, you stick around.
And there's, I think too, having, I know, Lizanne, you lived overseas as well, being in Guam during typhoon season. And it's like, you really can't evacuate everybody together all at the same time from a tiny little island in the Pacific. So making sure that you're prepared is a really big thing with generators and everything else. Rebecca, before we go to rapid fire, which is always my very favorite thing other than giving away gifts like Oprah, I do want to talk a little bit about the importance of having a plan. So talk to us a little bit about some of the elements you'd like to see in somebody's family plan or emergency plan, what that looks like, some of the special considerations that folks should ensure that they have in there.
Okay, this is a good one. I would like them to look at their specific family needs. I touched a little earlier on medications. If you have babies and you need that stuff, pets, you need to take all that into consideration, of course, because you want to bring all those people and animals with you as you go. So look at what you need. Then pare it down a little bit more to what you actually really need. And think about all of the things that could come at you. So if you're living on the Gulf Coast and a hurricane's coming and you need to leave the area, it's going to look different than if you're sheltering in place at home. So where can you go? How far can your car go on a tank of gas? What's reasonable for you to drive? What's there in that spot? Can you book a hotel room in advance? Are you going to an evacuation center? It's kind of like PCSing, where you have to have a plan. You have to have several plans, and you have to have people that you can rely on to help with these things. And you need to be able to do it alone if necessary. So I look at what's going to affect my area. So where I live right now, not a whole lot is going to directly impact me. Fires were a thing in Arizona, a big thing in Arizona that we had to really look at. And those, you just don't mess around with it. There's no option. You have to go. You just need to leave. You cannot run it. So that's going to look different from, I know a hurricane's coming in 5 days. I think it's going to hit my place. When do I need to leave? Kind of a thing. As a bare bones plan, you should have enough food and water for 3 to 4 days. You should have enough extra medication, blankets, batteries, or weather radio, that kind of stuff, like ready to go in your car would be nice, especially if you live someplace. We didn't touch on winter storms, but you're going to need and want extra blankets and such in the car for winter storms. But really, really take a look at what you need. Have it ready to go. During fire season, you might just keep it in your car, or hurricane season, keep it in your car so you're ready to go. I think one thing is really important, particularly I've noticed as my children get older, is they're not home all the time. We need to have a communication plan so that if we need to go, they know where to meet me. If they're home alone and it's time for us to evacuate or something's happening, they need to know where to go, that kind of meeting place afterwards. So it's a lot of stuff in there on how to make that plan, but make the plan. Don't be afraid to change it if you need to. Communicate the plan, both inside your family and outside. You'll want to tell close friends, family members who are going to call you as soon as they see that a hurricane is coming towards the coast of Florida, because grandma is going to do that every time. And just say, I have a plan. This is where I'll go if I need to. And it reassures everybody.
Other than the PCS Grids blog, which of course is chock full of all the information you could possibly need when it comes to disaster preparedness, what are some of your favorite resources that folks can use and help develop some of these family plans?
So FEMA's website, The Red Cross has a lot of really good information out there. Those are my go-to places. Ready.gov. Whose is that? Is that FEMA?
Yeah, that's FEMA.
Okay.
That's my fave. Ready.gov is the best.
It's got everything. Yeah.
I like that. And Rebecca, we do have a few questions about insurance as well. I know we dropped a link in the comments earlier that dives into specifically what will your insurance cover in different situations. You know, do you need the flood insurance, the fire insurance, wind and hail, all those different types of coverages, which are usually additional and not automatic. But talk to us a little bit about the process if your house has been through some type of damage to either the property or your belongings inside. How does that work on base and how does that work off base? And what should we be looking for?
Right. So renter insurance is really important, particularly if you live on base. It used to be covered as part of your payment to that housing company. It was never really enough coverage at that point, but a lot of people kind of overlook that. So make sure that you have enough to cover what's in your house, to replace the things in your house. And your homeowner's insurance, I just did some research on this the other day, that you might find that going up over the next year or two. And a lot of people are not really pleased with that, myself included. However, it costs more to rebuild your house now than it did 2 years ago. That's why you want to make sure that you have enough coverage to completely replace everything. Storm damage, flood damage is the thing that you really need to make sure you have extra coverage on. There are ins and outs of the insurance world that I don't understand, that I'm not even going to try to tell you this is exactly how things go. My only experience with recovering from emergency damage is that USAA paid me to replace the food in my freezer because we lost power for 4 days. And that was super simple and very helpful. So if you have a question about what your home or renter insurance coverage, you need to talk to that company and make sure, please, that you tell them that you moved. You have to tell them that you moved, because if you're living in Kansas on paper, but you're actually living in Mississippi, they're going to be really surprised when a hurricane hits you.
It's true. I could see that being a problem. We've only had to file for, we had a tree limb go through our house, but it created a really small hole somehow. And we had to get that patched up for probably about the same amount as our deductible. And I remember having the wind and hail coverage for hurricanes in North Carolina, but thankfully, aside from, I think, some minor shingles that had to get replaced at one point, that's about as far as it went. So
good.
All right, Tessa, I think it's rapid fire.
Rapid fire.
I'm nervous now.
Oh, no, it's pretty fun. All right, rapid fire. Here we go. Number 1, best place to order items for our emergency kits.
Amazon.
Yay.
All right, easy enough. How about MREs? My husband loves them. Is that useful to have on hand for your kits?
This is supposed to be a short answer, right? I say no, but I don't think my kids would eat it, to be honest with you. If you have them around and you want to eat them, fine. I think you can probably do better with snacks and protein bars and, I mean, fruit snacks never go bad, right? So you can have boxes of those and your kids will be just fine.
Cold SpaghettiOs are a beautiful thing.
I will add that even though the MREs are pretty shelf stable and have that long expiration date, the heating element does actually expire sooner than the food. And so we have run into MREs that no longer heat up and are really not that good cold.
Very concerning to me.
The more you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Hard pass. All right. Should I have a plan for our pets?
Yeah, you should absolutely have a plan for your pets. Do you want me to talk more about that or just yes?
I think yes.
You can expand a little. What would that look like?
Check to see what evacuation centers will take pets. That's a big thing. Hotels will generally take pets in the state of an emergency, even if they don't normally. But you might find that a hotel isn't an option at that point. But yes, make sure you take care of your pets. Bring them with you. Bring their food with you, their medication. They are going to be, I have a dog and she doesn't even like it when we're not all home at the same time. I can't imagine. We start packing the car. She's like, am I coming too? So they will be comforting to you and to your kids. If you have kids, your pets, they're a part of your family. You need to include them in your plan.
For sure. And I think you touched on this, but just to verify, what emergency radio stations or apps do you recommend?
So I mentioned the NOAA Facebook page and how they have that. Your smartphone should automatically give you weather updates similar to Amber Alerts when things are coming through. One thing I really wanted to stress on, because I find this to be very helpful, is that your installation should have an emergency alert system. And as a member of the community, you can get on that alert. Okay, so it doesn't have to be just active duty or service member. I mean, you can get those texts. I still get them from Arizona because I'm not sure how to unsubscribe, but more information is better than less. So when there's something going on at Fort Gordon, where we live close to, I can get a text and I know what's happening. The more information, the better. You can figure out if you're in the county that's going to be affected or if it's halfway across the state. But local radio stations will, interrupt the music for their National Weather Service update. Also, I don't want to say her name because then she'll talk back to me, but I have a nice lady up there. She's round. She lets me know when things are happening too. So the National Weather Service will go through that. So there's lots of opportunities to get the information. And those are the really reliable sources. I mean, honestly, the neighborhood Facebook page is not where I'm getting my weather alerts.
That's fair. All right. Well, we are almost ready to give away our emergency preparedness kit prize through our wheel of names. So I am going to check through for a few more of your comments. I know that you had asked if Jenna, who's on the PCS grade staff, if she had any feedback about evacuating, and her helpful tip is that everyone had to turn in receipts. This was in regards to reimbursement and insurance. And I guess only cities within a certain zone were approved. And so if you evacuated outside of that zone, those receipts were not eligible for reimbursement. Have you ever heard of those situations or anything you want to expand on there?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I had asked Jenna. I know that some people decided to leave anyway and did so on their own dime. It's hard. I mean, Tessa, you said the evacuation line that one time was, across the street. I'd have left then. I mean, but I know that I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that. I work remotely and I have a savings account that I can do that. So it's not something that I can say, you have to go do this. But it's just something to keep in mind. You might not be reimbursed for everything. And that stinks, but you have to make the best decision with the information that you have at that time.
Yeah. And really, like you said, going early is such a smart move because, I think we all probably remember the images of evacuating for Katrina with just cars and miles of folks parked on the highway, running out of gas and unable to evacuate. So Rebecca, while we are wrapping up here, I know we're getting ready to do our wheel of names. Tell us about your favorite preparedness activity. What's your, do you have a favorite disaster that you like to help folks prepare for?
Oh man.
You're weirdo like me. I know you do.
No, I like to watch those movies, where everything goes wrong and then criticize what they should have done.
Are you, this is maybe way too much information about myself, but are you a walk into the mall and you immediately assess your egress points and you have a constant going plan of?
If I went to the mall, I would do that. I'm not a mall person, but yes, I do like to know what's happening and what I can do to control it. I'm a little bit of a control freak. I'm an Enneagram 8. I just need to know what the information is. So I do think a lot about what happens if I'm here and what happens if I'm on vacation and I need to evacuate because a storm hits that, or what happens if, now it's mostly what happens if I'm here and my kids are here. How do I get them to make sure they're making the right decision? I have teenagers now, so they're doing things on their own. But I don't stress about it. It's more kind of almost like a game. We should make a board game, Tessa.
Let's do that. I'm so in. I love board games.
That'll be so fun.
All right.
I do want to take Carrie's question here too. You talked about the emergency preparedness kit in general. She's asking if you have a top choice for an essential gadget. I remembered we also had a question come in earlier through the Lost During My PCS Facebook group. And we asked people if they had any questions for you. They were asking about generators. living in a hurricane zone, how important is it to have that generator? Is it essential? And what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so a generator, I think, comes down to where you are and how likely you're going to get hit, and if you absolutely need to have that power. I mean, we all want it, but do you need it? Do you have someone that's, on oxygen or on some sort of a medical device that needs it? Or do you live way out in the country where it could take weeks for them to fix it? Those sorts of things. A lot of people in hurricane country have it for the weeks after. If you can get one and you think you're going to use it, I think it'd be helpful to have it, but I don't think it's essential. And as far as my top choice for an essential gadget, I have this really cool flashlight radio thing. I think we got it as a wedding present, but you can hand crank it and you can get the radio and you can also use it as a flashlight, and it's still here and it's still working. So that's my top choice. I mean, the most bang for your buck there.
Well, I'm so glad you said that because I think we have a very similar item in today's prize basket.
Yay.
It's there is a hand crank or hand powered radio, and it may or may not include a flashlight. So very exciting. And
all right, well, should we do it? Should we give them away?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. All right, everybody's names who have commented has been entered to win, and as many times as you commented, you have that many entries. Very fun. And the winner of our emergency kit today is...
Who's it gonna be?
Daniela Horn. Congratulations. So Daniela, if you would please make sure to Facebook message the page so that we can coordinate getting your emergency kit to you. We would appreciate that. Rebecca, it's always a joy to see you and to talk all things disaster and emergency. You're a wonderful resource, and I know everybody here is very appreciative of you sharing your time and your talents today, for sure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we let you go, why don't you tell us where people can find you on social media, online?
Mostly Instagram. That's probably the place to find me, and it's Rebecca_Allwine. That's where you'll find me. Yep.
Fun. And I'm going to let you guys know that we are taking a little bit of a break with our webinar in the summer. Partially it's my fault because my family has to move. I will be on the road 2 weeks from now when we would typically do our webinar, but we want to invite you to watch all of our past episodes and topics on the YouTube channel. So we're dropping it in the comments. You can find it on the screen here. And we have covered so many different things about PCSing in the past couple of years. So hopefully a lot of your questions and your topics are right there for your viewing on our YouTube channel. Until next time, this too shall PCS.